probably one of the more highly cleared public officials from the military, past serving, who's basically come out publicly and said, you think this is real? Why do you think there is this cover-up? What are they concealing?
I think it's about time that we do disclose that we are in contact with non-human intelligence. That's what needs to be put out there in the public.
I said, what? This science and this evidence is being kept secret for religious reasons? It's likely that on Earth, prior to the modern era, there have been civilizations far advanced beyond where we are, that for which we have very little record. And when that record is found, I think it's kind of swept under the carpet. Years ago, when they did the Mars images, and they found that there were these obelisks and strange-looking objects on Mars, I went out to the Goddard Space Flight Center here outside D.C. to meet with Mark Carlotta and some other scientists there, and they said, yep, it's been pixelated out for the public, but there are structures there. And they were very ancient, but we're talking millions of years old, millions. Here's the issue. You're right, those exist, but we can't disclose that. I said, why? It's not an operational ET device. It's not, it's old. He says, yes, but you don't understand how powerful this information is. I said, why? He says, if this was disclosed, it would collapse the fundamentalist orthodox belief systems of every religion on earth. And you would have to come up with something a little more rational, right? Than the world is 6,000 years old. This is true, by the way. Those of you in urban areas, you need to kind of wake up a bit about the rest of the world.
There's a shift, a change in perception of the public and the attitude. If it hadn't been for that, I would have went to my grave and never said a word about this, because I wanted a normal, mainstream life career. Like I'm going to tell people, yeah, I'll stand on top of an alien engine in the basement of a top secret base called Area 51, mainly because I built an engine similar to it and it landed there, and that's why they wanted me there. And I was 17 years old at the time. Never, despite the fact that I won the most outstanding field of engineering sciences from the United States Air Force in 1971, and we can see newspaper stories and clippings of me in that rocket. So I still wouldn't stand a chance. So I decided, no, I'm not saying a word. I saw a lot of people take tremendous criticism in the 60s and the 70s, but then there's been a shift in the last 20 years. The American public now really believes there's somebody else out there. And if somebody would land here right now, the American public would go, cool, as long as they're not trying to blow us away or eat us up or something, there's no problem. What they will be a problem is that if the federal government's caught lying, which I know they are lying, they've been lying for probably since 1971 that I know for sure. So if they've been lying, then Roswell very likely is true. So they've been lying 50 consecutive years and probably much longer than that. The engine I saw did not come from the Roswell crash. The engine I saw was as big as the Roswell craft. So this is something even bigger. So another one. So how many do they have? How much they got? That's where the real problem is. Who shot King? Who shot, Senator Kennedy, and JFK? If they lied this much to us, that's where the danger is that if it comes out, it's not so much as the public's going to panic that there's alien life out there. No, it's going to be anarchy, because people are going to be so ticked off with D.C. for lying so many years. That is what the government fears. They do not fear you being violent hostile about aliens landing and we're going to go crazy. No, they're going to freak out because they're going to be caught in about a 5-decade lie.
UFOs may be coming from a distant place, but often we see them coming from a much closer place. You know how you have an embassy, let's say, in one country because you're a foreign nation. It's possible, and don't take my words out of context, we don't have an alien embassy under the water. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying, as you would have an embassy in a foreign land, it is possible that there's a congregation or a station or a location underwater, where UFOs could be transiting from once they're here, wherever they come from, that is a possibility, that UFOs are transiting from a localized place underneath the water. When you go back to what Commander David Fravor saw and the other pilots of the circle of what appeared to be white water or boiling water, was the way it was explained to me the first time. There was an object under the water, and it appeared to be cross-shaped, and it was right under the water where the Tic Tacs were descending. The Tic Tac UFOs were descending to, and they were dropping in from above 80,000 feet all the way down to sea level in less than a second without a sonic boom. When these things were coming down, they were docking, and those are not my words. They were docking somehow, informationally maybe, with whatever was happening in the water or under the water. And again, I'm going to put that forward as my opinion, but that's how it was described to me. What were they doing before they were noticed? UFOs are known to be gravitationally propelled, and that they may not be coming from vast distances. And I want to caveat that. They're not saying that they know where they come from. They could come from another planet, no problem. We don't know. That's one of the options that's definitely on the table. But importantly, there was this implication that there might be a base or a location, like an embassy, that they could go and maybe fuel up their starships and come. I mean, who knows? I'm speculating jokingly. I have no idea.
Good with this. And I think that's really in the hands of every man, woman, and child on the planet. So I think the responsibility, ironically, yes, our leaders and these very powerful interests do have a lot of responsibility. But I agree with you. With each new administration or new leader in another country, these are the people who do disclose. And I've been saying for 20 years. I mean, remember the 2001 Disclosure Project Press Club event. I did because I had already decided and concluded that the governments of the world won't do it unless we do it first. So if the people lead, the leaders will follow. So we, the people, have to provide the impetus, the leadership, the vision. And I think that is a message of empowerment. It sort of scares people because people would rather sit in front of their television looking at TV and eating Cheetos. But in reality, this is a call for people to pick up this responsibility themselves. Everybody else, have someone else do it. No, everyone listening to this needs to understand you are not you, but all of us together are responsible for disclosure, for funding and supporting zero-point energy systems, for making contact with these civilizations. You don't need, if you want permission, I will give you permission. You have permission to make contact with these civilizations on behalf of the human race. You don't need the head of Army Intelligence to say, yes, you can, or the president. You're a child of Earth and you can do this, and this is what people have to do. So I think it's more about us taking responsibility for ourselves, our planet, and our future, and not look to the fact that Big Brother somewhere is going to do this for us, because that kind of dependency is a trap. I think we have to be in charge of disclosure. We have to be in charge of releasing these technologies. And we have to be also, we the people, in charge of an interplanetary peaceful diplomatic initiative, which is really how I started, why I got involved with all this. It wasn't disclosure. It's creating conscious people who understood the nature of the cosmos and the conscious universe within us. And
I think we need the maturation of the human race. We need to gain some wisdom. I think that's
we have the wisdom. We just have to own it.
Yeah.
Okay. All the knowledge and all the wisdom we need to make this leap into a new civilization exists today. All the technologies we need to have a sustainable, high-tech civilization we have today. It's all there. The missing link is the courage, the integrity, the vision to do it. There are people who are very supportive of this disclosure happening. The problem is moral support and taking dispositive action are two different things. And I think that the courage and integrity and willing to take the hit to your reputation.
And maybe your pension.
Look at the things that are said about me. There aren't a lot of people who. It's one thing if you whatever, but there aren't a lot of folks who give up their professional career, their political career. And so, to give you one little vignette, I had a meeting for about 11 hours with one of the deputy directors of the National Science Foundation and one of the 5 directors of NASA some years ago. And they were very, very supportive and interested in this. And they were dealing specifically with climate change and the problems with the biosphere. And the one was in charge of all the satellite imaging of the biosphere. And she told me back then that if the public knew how much trouble we were in, there'd be widespread panic. But I said, well, will you help us? And they said, no, this whole subject is too controversial and dangerous. It'd be the end of our careers. So I thought to myself, my career is here, the future of the human race and the planet is here. And so they choose their careerism. So at a certain point, people have to make a decision. This was the very hard decision I had to make a few years ago about my own career. Will I stay as an emergency doctor and have a comfortable upper middle class life doing this and that and the esteem of people for doing what I'm doing? Or become, as Lawrence Rockefeller told me I would be, sort of the court jester and made fun of and demeaned and defamed. But, I made the decision, I don't really care, what other people think. I care about what the right thing is to do. But that's very hard to find in the upper echelons of these bureaucracies, government, and corporations. This is why I keep returning to the fact that, yes, there are a lot of people following disclosure, a lot of people supportive. They don't want to lead it. Remember my story about Lawrence Rockefeller making his fingers like this, talking about the flock of geese?
Not even he wanted to lead it.
He was towards the end of his life. He wanted to be way back here. He didn't want to be up here. So I think the people need to take this leadership. The people need to do this. And I think the more that we empower ourselves and get out of this mindset that someone's going to do it for us, the better off we're going to be. It's time for us to come together as a planet, as a people. I hope Gaia can be instrumental in this in the future to organize a global movement to see that happen. Because really very quickly, this planet could be taken from the path it's on into a path of enlightenment and sustainability that'd be just amazingly beautiful. We wouldn't even recognize it in 20 years.
We just found out today, a very, very, very 100% credible source told our group that the Senate, Congress right now has 16 UFO films, UAP films. 5 members of Congress. Now, I don't know if that means Senate or the House. I think a mixture have seen these. They've watched them. And according to our source, who was there, he's a staffer. I won't say who, but he's a staffer, and he gives us all this inside information. So I can't disclose his name, obviously, but he said it scared the dickens out of the 5 that were in there. Now, 6 of these videos that they've watched were crash recovery videos. One of them is over 41 years old. It lasted 10 hours. It was originally on a 16 millimeter film. That's what they used back in those days. The military used the film. And it was, I guess, transferred over to 11 DVDs. And they didn't watch the entire 10 hours, but they watched segments of it. The person that was briefing them had it broken up in segments regarding the retrieval, the crash retrieval. The other ones involved, also these crash retrievals involved pictures of bodies, extraterrestrials. Now, I don't know who these 5 members of the Congress who saw these things, but I think Burkett had hinted to the fact that he knew about these videos. He didn't know, I don't think he mentioned 16, but there are 16, and they've been released by a alphabet agency, and I'm not going to say which agency because I don't want to get the staffer in trouble.
NBC, no.
We just found out today, a very, very, very 100%.
So we reached out to him and invited him to come to those events, and he politely declined and told us that it was made very clear to him and the other Apollo astronauts who witnessed this first event, where when we landed at the crater on the moon, the rim at the top of the crater was, quote, crowded with UFOs, the craft that were up there, multiple of them, and that these were filmed. I know people personally who've seen that film. We did go to the moon, but some of the footage, it doesn't make sense because the flag is moving. Now the reason for that, and this is where people say we didn't go to the moon, it was all hoax and filmed in a basement up in New York. The truth is we went, but during the lunar orbiter, going back before the Apollo mission, we actually were circling the Earth taking the first early digital photographs. And as you know from the testimony of Disclosure Project witness Carl Wolf, there were structures on the moon that were artificial. Some were newer and some were very ancient. And so they knew the covert programs, and these images were being downloaded to out here at Langley, not the CIA headquarters, Langley Air Force Base, to a compartmented operation run by the National Security Agency that was then sequestered away from the other NASA scientists. But the people running that project, the deep black people in those projects, knew that it was likely we were going to encounter something not of this world or a UFO when we landed. Therefore, they had filmed some footage that they could splice in if something started happening. So during the live transmission, if something started happening, there's a delay that went through this National Security Agency filter, and they could immediately, instantly put in. And that's why there's a couple frames where the American flag is moving. And so when they stepped out, of course, and we're approaching actually, before they even landed, they saw them. So they were already with this sort of pre-prepared film that looked very, very good, except for this one error. And so Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin know for a fact. Now, Neil Armstrong said, look, if I were to go forward and talk about what actually happened, I've been told, Neil Armstrong said this to us, that my wife, my children, and my grandchildren would all be killed, that they would take us out somehow, some terrible accident. And he says, I'm not going to talk about it. Now, Buzz Aldrin has just basically, he sort of had a nervous breakdown after this and was actually at an Air Force facility. I know a man that was there with him, and he confided that this is also what happened. I also know Buzz Aldrin's sister, who pulled me aside and says, yes, you're absolutely right, that is what happened, but it's not my job to out Buzz Aldrin on this. If he's ready and he's able and allowed, he will speak about it. But you have to understand, enormous pressure was put on these men never to speak about what actually happened.
It was even said that piloted flights to the moon might be banned. Investigators are especially interested in ancient structures resembling partially destroyed cities. Photos reveal an astonishingly regular geometry of square and rectangular constructions. They resemble our cities seen from the height of 5 to 8 kilometers. A mission control specialist commented on the pictures. Our guys observed ruins of the lunar cities, transparent pyramids, domes, and God knows what else, which are currently hidden deep inside the NASA safes, and felt like Robinson Crusoe when he suddenly came across prints of bare feet on the sand of the desert island. What do geologists and scientists say after studying the pictures of lunar cities and other anomalous objects? They say that such objects can't be natural formations. We should admit, they are artificial, especially the domes and pyramids. People were extremely surprised why the materials hadn't been presented to the public earlier. NASA specialists answered, it was difficult to forecast the reaction of people to information that some creatures had been or still are on the moon. In addition, there were some other reasons to it, which were beyond the control of NASA. Astronaut Mitchell answered the question about his feelings after his successful return. My neck still aches as I had to constantly turn my head around because we felt we were not alone there. We had no choice but to pray.
Attempted to put a nuclear weapon on the moon and explode it for scientific measurements and other things, which was not acceptable to the extraterrestrials.
And what happened?
They destroyed the weapon before it got to the moon. The idea of any explosion in space by any Earth government was not acceptable to the extraterrestrials, and that has been demonstrated over and over.
Dedrickson is one of the hundreds of whistleblowers with verified, credible, and impressive backgrounds to speak up about an extraterrestrial presence. In that same interview, he went on to state that a spacecraft went to the rescue of Apollo 13, and they accompanied Apollo 13 on their voyage around the moon back to Earth. And on 2 occasions, they thought they might have to transfer the crew to their spacecraft, but they saw them safely back to Earth. This may explain why several astronauts have also been quite outspoken about an extraterrestrial presence, like Edgar Mitchell, Brian O'Leary, Story Musgrave, Gordon Cooper, and many others.
Now, one of the things that Neil Armstrong was overheard saying, and this was reported in Timothy Good's book, Above Top Secret, is that Neil Armstrong stated that we were essentially warned off the moon. That, in other words, these civilizations did not want us going to other moons or planets to colonize them with the consciousness of nationalism and the Cold War. Because remember, the Apollo project was really a proxy for the Cold War. The United States was in a complete panic when Sputnik overtook our space program, the Soviets. And so the race to the moon was part of, and always was part of, the military competition between 2 huge superpowers, the old Soviet Union and the United States of America. And so when we went there, but we went there not as a peaceful world civilization, but as a competing Cold War effort that were armed with thousands of thermonuclear weapons, hydrogen bombs, pointed at each other. That was not the consciousness that the ETs want to see us going into space with. They want us going into space with the consciousness of peace and cooperation, not militarism and war. So that's sort of your, let's say if there's an entry ticket to space exploration, that's the main one. And we haven't quite reached that point, have we?
There's what they call Omicron configuration, where the craft is using one generator, or Delta configuration, where it's utilizing all 3. Delta configuration would be for space travel. Essentially, the craft will tilt up on its side, focus the 3 gravity generators to a single point, and move through space that way. If you were going to see one of these crafts at night operating, it would appear really as a glowing ball or just a bright light in the sky from a distance. Even close up, you'd see a glowing halo around it. What you're dealing with is a high energy source in essentially a gas atmosphere, oxygen, nitrogen. And when you apply enough energy to a gas molecule, they emit photons, they emit light.
Background and information. It wasn't a story I could do then. We're negotiating about how or when or if I could ever use that information or make it public. He told me the details about this craft. He said that he says they worked on this recovered craft, reverse engineering, trying to figure out how it worked, who built it. Another meeting at a coffee shop, and I said, well, gosh, aren't you worried that it would get out, that the word would get out? And he says to me, we were worried it would get out. That's right. I mean, what do you mean, it? It, meaning a live being. They had a live being out there. I go, what? You had a live being? An alien? So, well, tell you the truth, we didn't know what it was. I said, maybe it came from millions of miles away out in space, and you're keeping it in a cage near Area 51. He said, to tell you the truth, we couldn't communicate with it in the beginning. We didn't know what it was. We didn't know where it was from. And we didn't know what to do with it.
I interviewed one man on his deathbed who called me and had me come to meet with him. He's got tubes on him, and he's lying in his bed dying. And he was a member of Project Blue Book that was sent. That he was a part of the team that monitored the classified portions of Blue Book, the sections where they realized they had a real UFO that they were dealing with. And he said that when he went to the site where there was a live extraterrestrial being, that being was questioned and was they had discussions with that person, that being, and that being said that he was part of a group that they came from different star systems, and they were working in a coordinated way to monitor what the state of development of life was on different planets inside our galaxy. And these were the people that were coming here to our planet to monitor what our civilization was like. And so that there was some degree of cooperation, he indicated, among those. And when he was asked, well, who's in charge there? What was the entity that was in charge of bringing those different star systems together to cooperate in this survey? And he said, well, the being said, according to the person, he said that it's something like you might refer to as God, but it's very different than you think.
Do you think, Danny?
Again, I think that in light of the fact that he was on his deathbed telling me about this, I tended to give credit to what he was saying. But he was so upset about the whole thing that he refused to tell anybody about it until he was on his deathbed, because he said he didn't believe him. He thought that the being was diabolical in some way. Now, he was an incredible fundamentalist, this guy that was dying. And so he thought that it was demonic, the being. But the being was at S4, where he was there. And it was actually he wasn't communicating directly. His commander was. But they were taking notes and putting them on note cards when the interview was going on. And that's what he said was on the note card. So, that's all I can tell you about what I know about, at least from that direct interview, about what he said. But my sense is, again, the importance of having a responsible board with a staff that are.
If I had some sort of a super sophisticated drone technology that is above and beyond what we think of in terms of what's technologically available today, I would say it's UFOs too. I would say, we've out of this world craft. Yeah.
Yeah, but some of that is reverse engineered stuff.
Could be.
Right? That's what
Bob
Lazar
could be.
says. Yeah.
Or there could be a branch of physics. This is what Eric Weinstein has theorized. And the way he talks about it's quite brilliant. And he talks about this one particular college in New York, one particular university that has an insane physics department. And it's also connected to this hedge fund that does like Bernie Madoff numbers that don't seem to make sense. But so that would be a great way to get money for these things. And that you have this insane physics department. So you have these people, if you talk, that's one of the things that Diana Pasulka talked about in her book, about the people that are documented that are involved in these crash retrieval programs and supposedly involved in these back engineering programs. The amount of secrecy and their adherence to secrecy is spectacular. And this idea that people can't keep secrets, what the fuck they can't? Yeah, people could keep secrets.
What do you think is the ultimate reason for that? Because there's a lot of ideas on why they can't release it. Because like Roswell, and there's been a number of different types of Roswells, which whether that was ETs that we interacted with, whether there's some sort of alliance between other, alien extraterrestrial races, and what do you think is the major fear around not releasing that?
Well, I think there's a bunch of fears. First of all, someone has got to be held responsible for misallocation of funds. So let's say that you have defense spending, you have some private company, which is, by the way, which they all think it's private companies that are involved in defense companies that are involved in this research.
Like the Lockheed Martin of the world.
Which are much better at keeping secrets,
right?
Than the government is. And that if you have misallocation of funds and you've lied to Congress, Like, someone goes to jail for that. We're talking about laundering, essentially. Could be hundreds of millions, if not billions and billions of dollars over decades. So who made these decisions? Did they make the decisions? Did Congress not know about it? So if they didn't know about it, they're going to want to know about it. And if they find out that you've been lying to them all this time, well, guess what? You're going to jail. So who's going to jail? Who misallocated funds? Where did the funds go? Was any of that funds filtered? Did anybody get wildly rich during this time? Was there some skimming like we think is going on in Ukraine? Was there, when you have a shitload of money.
But who went to jail when Rumsfeld said on September 10th of 2001, there's $2 trillion missing?
Yeah.
Unaccounted for.
Nobody. Well, they couldn't account for, right? Is an interesting way of saying it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nobody. Yeah. Well, also.
Okay, so yeah.
The Pentagon fails its audit every year.
Yeah. It's amazing.
It's crazy.
But they just hired all those IRS agents to go after.
Yeah.
To go after everybody.
Anybody who spends more than $300.
Yeah. No, yeah. I mean, there's also conversations around how it can fuck with religion, and the the ideologies that so many people have and the belief systems. If there's, say there is extraterrestrial life, and how many planets in the galaxy have we found now that could sustain life even in a close proximity to us?
Yeah, quite a few.
Yeah. So
but Diana Pasulka's work, what they're talking about is not even necessarily something from another planet. Perhaps something from another planet, but maybe
Earth?
something that's from another dimension. Maybe something that's hyper advanced that has the ability to access us and can come and go as it pleases, can go in and out.
So it's basically here all the time. We just can't see it because it's multidimensional.
Yes.
It's fifth dimension.
It's something.
Yeah.
And then also, I mean, again, this is what Bob Lazar talked about when he was on the show. He said, if you had brought a nuclear reactor to, the 1400s and showed it to people, it'd be indistinguishable from magic. They'd be like, what the fuck is that? This is sorcery. This is crazy. But now it's just normal. As time goes on, 1 million years, 2 million years from now, if somehow or another there's intelligent beings that have continued this evolution of technology and innovation, they're going to get to a place where they have the ability to do things that are unfathomable. You can't even imagine it. Your mind is not capable of it because you don't have a point of reference. You don't have context. There's not pre-existing technology that leads you to make a logical bridge towards this potential. That's
not the words. Like they talk about some of the stories in the ancient texts and in the Bible. They they don't have the words to explain like what a spaceship is. It's like, no, it's like a chariot in the sky.
Ezekiel.
Yeah.
When you pull up the description that Ezekiel had of the wheel within a wheel, my God, it sounds like a UFO.
Yeah.
And what a lot of people, I would like to talk to Tucker Carlson about this, because Tucker Carlson has this belief too. He just talked to people about this, and he thinks it's always been here, and that it's a part of existence, and that this is a part of these biblical stories of angels and devils, and that's what they're really talking about. They're talking about these interdimensional beings, and the darkest theory is one that Lazar talked about. He said something that they talked to him about when he was working on these back-engineered crafts is that what they use us as is vessels that we are souls. We hold souls, and that this is essentially a farm, and this is how they develop souls through us, and that what our soul is. I mean, if you had to imagine what our soul is some force, something that they farm here with us. When we die, it transcends and becomes whatever they are in whatever space they exist in.
That's what Bob said?
He's talking about it, that this is one of the crazier stories that has to do with religion that's attached to the UFO phenomenon. And Diana
Tucker's talked about the demonic part of it. Yeah. What did Diana say?
Well, this is what some of these people think, is that these things have always been here, and they are a part of our history, and that this idea that they're coming here on these metal crafts from another planet is not necessarily the whole picture, that it might be some of that, because we do that. Like, we send drones to Mars. if we get to the point where we have artificial intelligence, or I should say created intelligence, digital intelligence that exists in some sort of a physical form that we can use in a physical craft that doesn't have the biological limitations of tissue, need oxygen, and all the things that would prevent us from being able to travel in deep space. And you could send this thing out into the cosmos, and this thing behaves like a life form. I mean, then we're essentially on our way to doing that. We have a rover that's moving around on Mars right now as we speak.
The materials that we picked up weighed anything. Looked like it was weightless. You couldn't feel that you had anything in your hands. I found one piece of metal, what looked like metal anyway. It was not flexible, but it was as thin as a foil in a pack of cigarettes. It was that thin. One of my boys told me, he said, there's something unusual here. He said, I tried to make a dent in this metal. He says, you can't bend it. You can't make a mark on it. He says, I took a sledgehammer and whammed it. I put it on the ground and whammed it. The sledgehammer bounced off of it. He told me not to say anything. He says, I'll handle it from now on. And that's exactly what he did. When he came out, he said, he told the press that was there, he said, that was nothing but a weather balloon, crashed weather balloon. It was definitely not a weather balloon. And it was an aircraft. So what it could have been, I wouldn't know. I still don't know.
They took pictures, of course. They had a whole flock of microphones there. They wanted me they wanted some comments from me, but I wasn't at liberty to do that. So all I could do is keep my mouth shut. And General Ramey is the one who discussed, told the newspapers, the newsmen, what it was and to forget about it. It was nothing more than a weather observation balloon, of course, which we both knew differently. We left Roswell perhaps around 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. As you can see, it's flat. It is very difficult. In fact, with just verbal directions, we never would have found it. We had to follow the rancher out there. The following morning, we went out to the site where the crash was. And what I saw, I couldn't believe there was so much of it. It was scattered over such a vast area. So we proceeded to pick up as much of the debris as we could, loaded in a wagon. We filled that up. It took us a good part of the day to do that, because there's such small fragments that we had to do a lot of picking. We found a piece of metal about a 1.5 to 2 feet wide and about 2 or 3 feet long. Felt like you had nothing in your hands. It wasn't any thicker than the foil out of a pack of cigarettes. But the thing about that got me is that you couldn't even bend it, you couldn't dent it. Even with a sledgehammer would bounce off of it. So I knew that I had never seen anything like that before. And as of now, I don't know what it was. It was not anything from this earth that I'm quite sure of. Because being an intelligence officer, I was familiar with just about all materials used in aircraft and in our air travel. This is nothing like that. It could not be. It could not have been.
The materials that we picked up weighed anything. Looked like it was weightless. You couldn't feel that you had anything in your hand.
Unbelievable. And this is why some of the pilots, like David Fravor, whom I've spoken with, very sincerely believe that those objects he chased had to be from another dimension, another world, another planet, whatever, and that we couldn't possibly have something like that. And yet we have knowledge and proof that those were in fact from the Lockheed Skunk Works. This particular site had electromagnetic pulse weapons that, of course, an electromagnetic pulse is what you get from a nuclear blast, but just that pulse factor can be weaponized. Now, that's against the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, but we have them. And of course, the organization doing this could care less about law, treaties, international law, et cetera. Who cares? If you're going to be rogue and break the law, you're going to break all of them, right? So what has happened when I was over this site, I realized this gentleman is a senior operator there, very senior, who actually has handled the biologicals, meaning the dead bodies. of the ETs, but also of the human pilots that we've killed that have accidentally strayed into that airspace during an operation that have been struck with these electromagnetic pulse weapons at both sites. The one site I was over, he said about 2 ET craft a year are knocked down there, and that he's been involved with retrieving and the OPSEC, operational security around it. He's extremely senior. And so it was kind of spooky because there was a security vehicle right by one of those as we descended right over the site, maybe 100, 200 feet, AGL, but ground level. But, and the director of the law enforcement strike team that we've been providing information to is behind me and the back of the backseat of the chopper. But the purpose of this was for us to review this site, because besides the fact that they're targeting and knocking down the ET craft, and by accident, unfortunately, a civilian aircraft, and they just completely get rid of the fuselage and the bodies of these poor people who have been killed over this site. And that's something we're looking at opening up a major investigation and lawsuit over, because it's a lot of people over the years that have been killed. This one site's been fully operational for 40 years, and 40, and yeah, 40, and have on average killed about 2 ET craft and retrieved those victims during that period. So that's 80 crash retrievals, just at one site. The other site, similar number. So when I tell people we have 122 crash retrieval cases, those are the ones that we have had people come forward and talk about. There's obviously probably more than 1,000 over the years, and I would say globally much more than that. The other problem is that we found out that that same site, this operation, they have people who've been trained using very advanced technologies. And what I described in 1991 as consciousness-assisted technology, interface between thought, consciousness, and technology, to essentially hijack an ET vehicle, bring it into the area, and kill it. And this particular gentleman is handing over to us a couple of these operators that do that. Most of the people doing that are killed in the process of their training, but there are some alive, and a couple of them are coming forward. Now, that sounds like science fiction, but it's true. And this is part of the problem, is that the deeper you go into the subject, the rabbit hole just gets crazier. And the truth is way more unbelievable than the fiction being sold. Now, of course, all these senior folks who've approached us know about how they've been conducting abductions, making them look alien, what those technologies entail, how they've been doing and why they've been doing mutilations. We have a new whistleblower who's involved in that directly. It's very dark stuff, as Tucker Carlson recently said in an interview with someone. But he doesn't know that a lot of the stage crafting of the scariest stuff are covert human programs conducting them for their psychological warfare value, quote unquote, quote the CI document. But that's something we hope to clear up with Mr. Carlson soon, and some other journalists who have been gaslit by some false information.
Yeah.
The problem is, I think the timeline's getting very short. I'm not trying to sound ominous. Right. I don't think there's 30 more years or 80 more years to fool around as things have been going. For one thing, the portrayal of the ETs by our covert illegal secret government is not going to be allowed to go on much longer. And if we don't fix it, there are forces out there in space that will, which is a worst case scenario. I want to repeat it. It's a worst case scenario. Everyone asks, why don't the ETs just come and fix all this? Oh no, you don't want that under any circumstances.
They work for the Air Force Special Operations Group out of Fort Belvoir, and they are the real men in black. These are special intelligence officers, specially trained. In fact, there's a special unit within the Air Force Intelligence Service. It's called Section K, and these men and women are sheep-dipped. And sheep-dipped means that they are They're military. They discharge them from the military. They make them civilians, and they bring them right back into their same job. The reason they do this is because they don't have to follow the military protocols, the dress and grooming standards, and they can operate freely, more freely, outside the military channels.
Tell us a little about their history and how they first appeared.
Back in the 1950s, when the Project Blue Book was occurring, there was investigations going on both overtly and covertly within the intelligence service. Most of the overt investigations were done by Air Force intelligence officers, one of them being my uncle, Edward Doty. And they would go out and ask questions, collecting overt information about UFO sightings. And then there was a secretive part of the Air Force Intelligence Service. The Air Force Intelligence Service had field operating units, and they started in the 50s, and they're even more prevalent even today.
What was their main agenda, and who did they actually, work for, or was it multiple three-letter agencies?
Their mission was to go out and collect the secret stuff, the secret information about UFO sightings or a UFO incident that occurred, to collect photographs or debris, or get statements from people, examine the area where a UFO was sighted or landed, collecting evidence that's on the ground. And this was all covertly. So in order to covertly collect, they had to have disguises. And these guys were experts in disguises. Some of them were acting as plumbers, air conditioning repair people, telephone repair people outside a normal chain. They could easily talk to people. For instance, one incident that happened in Watertown, New York. These MIBs came out as electricians because of an incident that happened west of the community of Watertown, New York, in upstate New York. And this was in the 60s. The Project Blue Book investigators had already been there and collected information. But the two people that actually saw this UFO and took pictures, they wouldn't share anything with the Air Force investigators. So the Air Force sent in these two men who were posing as electricians, but they were the men in black. And although they weren't dressed in black, they were acting as this covert operating team. And they were able to talk to these people in a normal, everyday contact and ask them, hey, did you see something last week? Was there some kind of a UFO incident? Well, these people opened up to these two, and they obtained the photographs that the Air Force wanted.
At what point in a mission do they actually show up?
They come later. They come after the initial investigative team arrives. Either Project Blue Book investigators, or after that, the investigators that arrived on scene to collect the evidence or interview the witnesses to this. And then, depending on what information that the initial investigative team obtains, then the MIBs come in. Now, the story is that the MIBs are always there at every scene or every incident, and that's not true. These guys come in on legitimate sightings. They come in and get the real important stuff that the initial investigative team didn't get. The real men in black, they work for the...
This weekend has really broadened my perspective, I would say, in terms of what I think might be going on, and some of that is diversity of, you can think about it from a nuts and bolts perspective of vehicular types or behaviors, orbs versus tic tacs versus discs, but also that there seems to be some pretty fundamentally sort of diverse nature of maybe behaviors or interactions. So can you, I don't know, fill us in to the extent that you can, and I know you're limited in what you can say, but to what extent do you see that as, in your experience, the people you talk to, is that a fundamental aspect of this, that there's lots of things going on, whether we think of them as different species or different types of NHI? Can you comment on that?
Yeah, certainly this phenomenon is not a singular type source, etc. I mean, many of the people I talked to that were actively working on the program did use the term extraterrestrial when briefing myself and my colleagues, on their activity, and kind of that's the parlance they used within the program. But certainly, I'm skeptical of that being the only origin, and that's why I'm happy that non-human intelligence has been used in the Schumer Amendment, because how do you determine origin? Do you believe the origin because your worldview says anything that doesn't look Homo sapien must come from elsewhere? So I'm familiar with obviously the work Jacques Vallée and others have done, and I think certainly many scholars will probably back me up on this, where I think there's this non-corporeal phenomenon. Who knows what that is? Just like as Jacques Vallée has mentioned in Passport Magonia, right? It could be interdimensional, multidimensional, because the phenomenon shows itself in different forms over the years, from antiquity, witches sitting on chests, which maybe was the progenitor of the modern abduction phenomenon potentially. So I don't think the U.S. government quite has a handle on all the different types of origin of this phenomenon. That is kind of the vibe I got. Certainly the term extraterrestrial has been used behind closed doors with me, but I'm a little skeptical that is the total answer to the genesis.
Brother, haters are going to hate, and that's because they have agendas, and because for whatever reason they've made a little cottage industry since they were 15 years old on this stuff, and this is all they know. And by the way, if real disclosure happens, they don't have a job, because this is all they've been doing. Their whole job has been disclosure. Well, now that disclosure is really upon us, and we have public hearings, it's no, it's all lies, obfuscation, because otherwise they're going to have to get a job at Starbucks and get a real job. So that's the unfortunate side of this, and I really don't have time to get into the weeds with these people who cherry pick information, because at the end of the day, they're not journalists. Brother, haters are going to hate, and that's because they have agendas, and because for whatever reason they've made a little cottage industry since they were 15 years old on this stuff, and this is all they know. And by the way, if real disclosure happens, they don't have a job, because this is all they've been doing. Their whole job has been disclosure. Well, now that disclosure is really upon us, and we have public hearings, it's no, it's all lies, obfuscation, because otherwise they're going to have to get a job at Starbucks and get a real job. So that's the unfortunate side of this, and I really don't have time to get into the weeds with these people who cherry pick information, because at the end of the day, they're not journalists.